Hey, this is Noah. So, there's been a bit of unfortunate news in the world of Stadia. There's not an easy way to spin it positively, so let's just get into it. For those who are not aware, in addition to Google running Stadia, they also founded some Stadia first-party development studios, akin to how Nintendo has their own first-party development studios like R&D1. For the uninitiated, a first-party game is a game that was created by the same people who put it out on their platform. A Nintendo game is always going to be a first-party game on their platform. Companies that publish games on another company's platforms, those would be third-party games. Throughout the industry, it is common, if not expected, for companies like Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo to have first-party titles to supplant what they're doing. I don't think it's explicitly a requirement, but it is heavily expected for you to do so. More importantly, a first-party title does not necessarily denote a platform exclusive. Games like Horizon Zero Dawn eventually came to PC, and the Halo franchise is also on PC, but that's also Microsoft, so might not count. So here's the thing. Stadia shutting down their first-party development studios is unfortunate, and most people are probably going to take it as the end, or at least the beginning of it. Looking at Phil Harrison's post, what their rationale seems to be is that they don't want to continue funding money into that studio because they could be funding money into bettering the platform, and they're going to prioritize then getting third-party games. Now let me make this clear. The first-party development studio would very likely be making games exclusive to Stadia. Exclusives, as you probably have heard if you've watched my other videos, are something that I believe are a necessity for a platform to be compelling. You could have some of the best hardware and the best visuals, and you could have some of the best games in the world, but if I can play those games on another platform, why would I? Ideally, Stadia having their own first-party development studio would have also shown that they were invested into this, literally, and it may have dissuaded some people who would have thought Google's just going to shut this down in a few years. But unfortunately, we now exist in this timeline where, because they decided to do this, and at a very weird time, mind you, right after the holiday, where Stadia was actually getting decent press by comparison and had the phenomenal launch of Cyberpunk 2077, they came out with this news. I already have seen people on Twitter throwing this as like a, guess they're done. Frankly, that's how I learned about it. The only way I can possibly think about this, not even in a positive way, but more in just an understanding sort of way, I see it as Google realized that because of how well Cyberpunk launched on Stadia, that perhaps they thought, we don't have to put money into making our own titles, we can just pay people to put them on our platform. Suggesting that maybe it's cheaper to just go pay companies to port their games or develop for us, rather than try to fund our own titles, and maybe just get the same result. In other words, suggesting maybe they want to just get more games like Cyberpunk on their platform, and they're just like, yeah, I guess that's all we gotta do. When you look at the competitors, xCloud just has games from Xbox Game Pass. In other words, titles that are not exclusive to that service, they're just an extension of what you already own. GeForce Now is literally built on that. Luna comes with a platform of just games that you get right at the get-go. So perhaps there's a prevailing theory that because the competition doesn't require exclusives to their platform, they think, well, we need to concentrate on doing what they're doing at least. Because one of the prevailing issues with Stadia is its lack of titles. Maybe that's what they're thinking of doing. Because if they can pay companies who are already knee-deep in development to port games, it will be much faster than trusting their own development studio, a studio that had only just started, more or less, and very likely were in a sort of experimental era. I imagine because a lot of people were hoping that we would see titles that would leverage what Stadia promised before, many of its exclusive features and that kind of stuff. I'm wondering if their in-house development studios were trying very hard to use those things and thus might have been held back somewhat in terms of development time. Like maybe they needed more time to get that going. Now, what I'm wondering as an aside from this is if this directly contradicts a post that I'd seen before where they were seeking out people to develop games for launch 2023 and on. And I'm like, is this a renouncing of that? Or perhaps this was the foreshadowing of that they would rather hire third-party people to do so as opposed to a first-party one. Another way you can look at it is this is them cutting corners because they're not making quite as much money as they were hoping. Maybe they're still working at a loss. Then again, it's Google, but couldn't have been cheap to set this up. They're trying to assure people that this isn't like in finality, that this is still like we're good, we're going to continue pushing forward. And in spite of all their efforts, people are still getting frustrated. I saw people who were saying that they were not going to be purchasing any games in the future because all of a sudden the fears of it shutting down and their titles no longer being available to them is coming back. And if I'm being honest, I don't really blame them because I even had that thought as soon as I read it. It's kind of a tough place to be in. But I do want to assure something because I did read something on Reddit that apparently in the past, when Google has shut down services, they have offered refunds for people. In short, suggesting the idea that perhaps besides maybe your Stadia Pro subscription that you've paid for, any games that you might have bought, they would be refunding the cost for those to you if it were to ever go down. Unfortunately, we do not have an official confirmation of what they would do if they did shut down. And frankly, for all the people who are desperately trying to get that answer out of people, I want to make clear that I don't think they should tell people. Or, sorry, let me reword that. I don't think they can. Because if Google decides to tell people what their contingency plan is, then that means they are prepared to fail. Let that sink in for a minute. Because if Google is prepared to fail, then people will lose faith in that. I think more, potentially, than otherwise. That could be a hot opinion, hot take, whatever. But I wouldn't expect this company to be like, well, okay, everyone. Just in case if we decide to shut down, like that wouldn't make sense, right? You would want the company to try to give you assurances that everything's going to be fine. But I do admit that in this case, it seems like even though they do that, it feels like nobody believes them. That being said, it does sting quite a bit. I guess I don't feel necessarily personally offended as if I was a like a Stadia stan, if you wanted to call it. I treat Stadia like all other platforms on my channel and how I function in my day-to-day. In some respect, I feel bad that this is going down. I hope that this isn't a declaration of the beginning of the end for them. I will still cover them to the best of my ability. This felt a little bit different, and I guess I'm sort of under this impression that, like, in the next coming days, there's going to be every YouTuber that talks about Stadia, let's just trash on it immediately as soon as something bad happens. Under the assumption that that was going to happen, I felt like I should offer a video attempting to be reasonable as opposed to just saying, like, kick him while he's down. Anyway, if you didn't want a biased opinion on the subject, go read a news article. Well, actually, that's not even necessarily true. That's pretty much all I got. If you like this video, feel free to give it a like. If you want to see more videos regarding Stadia, you can subscribe. I'll cover it as long as it's around. It sounded oddly sentimental. It's funny. This is Noah. That's Stadia. See ya.